Miss, or Miss is an English honorific used with the last name or full name of a woman, intended as a default form of address for women regardless of their marital status. Like Miss and Mrs., the term Miss has its origins in the female English title once used for all women, Mistress. It was invented in the 20th century. Various plural forms used are Mses, Mses, and Mmes. Historical development and revival of the term, Miss began to be used as early as the 17th century, along with Miss and Mrs., as a title derived from the then former Mistress, which, like Mr., did not originally indicate marital status. Miss, however, fell into disuse in favor of the other two titles and was not revived until the 20th century. The earliest known proposal for the modern revival of Miss as a title appeared in the Republican of Springfield, Massachusetts on November 10, 1901. There is a void in the English language which, with some diffidence, we undertake to fill. Everyone has been put in an embarrassing position by ignorance of the status of some woman. To call a maiden Mrs. is only a shade worse than to insult a matron with the inferior title Miss. Yet it is not always easy to know the facts. Now, clearly, what is needed is a more comprehensive term which does homage to the sex without expressing any views as to their domestic situation, and what could be simpler or more logical than the retention of what the two doubtful terms have in common. The abbreviation Miss is simple, it is easy to write, and the person concerned can translate it properly according to circumstances. For oral use it might be rendered as Ms, which would be a close parallel to the practice long universal in many bucolic regions, where a slurred Miss does duty for Miss and Mrs. alike. The term was again suggested as a convenience to writers of business letters by such publications as the Bulletin of the American Business Writing Association and the Simplified Letter, issued by the National Office Management Association. In 1961, Sheila Michaels attempted to put the term into use when she saw what she thought was a typographical error on the address label of a copy of news and letters sent to her roommate. Michaels was looking for a title for a woman who did not belong to a man. She knew the separation of the now common terms Miss and Mrs. had derived from Mistress, but one could not suggest that women use the original title with its now loose connotations. Her efforts to promote use of a new honorific were at first ignored. Around 1971, in a lull during a WBAI radio interview with a feminists group, Michaels suggested the use of Ms. A friend of Gloria Steinem heard the interview and suggested it as a title for her new magazine. Miss. Magazine's popularity finally allowed the term to enjoy widespread usage. In February 1972, the U.S. government printing office approved using Miss in official government documents. Even several public opponents of non-sexist language, such as William Safire, were finally convinced that Miss had earned a place in English by the case of U.S. Congresswoman Geraldine A. Ferraro. Ferraro, a United States vice presidential candidate in 1984, was a married woman who used her birth surname professionally rather than her husband's. Safire pointed out that it would be equally incorrect to call her Miss Ferraro, or Mrs. Ferraro, and that calling her Mrs. Zoccaro would confuse the reader. Usage, suggestions about how Miss should be used, or whether it should be used at all, are varied. The American Heritage Book of English Usage states that, using Miss obviates the need for the guesswork involved in figuring out whether to address someone as Mrs. or Miss. You can't unregistered trademark T go wrong with Ms. Whether the woman you are addressing is married or unmarried, has changed her name or not, Miss is always correct. The Telegraph states in its style guide that Miss should only be used if a subject requests it herself and it should not be used merely because we do not know whether the woman is Mrs. or Miss. The Guardian, which restricts its use of honorific titles to leading articles, states in its style guide, use Miss for women unless they have expressed a preference for Miss or Mrs. The Economist states that it generally uses the title a person adopts, but warns that Miss is an ugly title. The most formally written sections of the Times and the Daily Telegraph, the Court and Social pages, both began to allow Miss in the 1990s, presumably if a woman requested to be referred to as such. The Times Court and Social page has allowed this form of address since 1991. And the equivalent Telegraph page has accepted it since 1995. Some etiquette writers and famous figures do not support the use of Miss, including Charles Kidd, the current editor of Debrett's Peerage and Baronetage, who claims the usage is not very helpful, and that he had been brought up to address a married woman as Mrs. John Smith, for example. The former British Conservative Party MP Anne Whitcomb stated, "I can't see the point of Miss and I don't see it as an issue." On the other hand, the default use of Miss, especially for business purposes, is championed by some etiquette writers, including Judith Martin. Notes. External links: The Times Style Guide, The Guardian Style Guide,